Hello and welcome back to Childcare Confidential. So glad that you are here with us today on our lovely Real Talk podcast for early childhood leaders, coaches, providers, and we have some parents out there listening. So, welcome. We love that you guys are following us, liking, sharing all the content that we are putting out to you for free, just because this is something that we are passionate about. Today, we are going to talk about the rule change that nobody announced. Oh, there's a lot of things happening in the world of early childhood today. So let's get into it. A federal rule took effect on July 13th this year that can change how and when you get paid. So, very, very important. Of course, in early childhood, there was no email, no webinar, and most owners still don't even know that it is happening. Unfortunately, in our field, we seem to have to go out and get the information ourselves. I have, however, seen a few things put out through NACY lately, NAEYC, for those of you that do not know. And it is talking about this federal rule change that is affecting all of us. Again, this isn't about advocacy, it's about whether your November deposit arrives before or after you've already paid your team. So let's talk about what has actually changed. On May 12th, HHS's Administration for Children and Families announced changes to CCDF, which is our childcare subsidy, following a public comments process that drew 998 comments from different state agencies, members of Congress, advocacy groups, educators, parents, and unions. Thank you so much if you did a public comment. These are very, very important. I wish more people in our field would start speaking up and getting involved in some of these public comments. I know sometimes you feel like you just can't change anything if you comment, but every comment helps. This change has taken effect on July 13th, 2026, according to NACY. 4 requirements from the 2024 rule were rescinded. Those requirements were paying providers based on enrollment rather than attendance. That is the big key here. Also, paying providers prospectively rather than retroactively. That's helpful since we're already putting out the funding to provide the care. And using grants to serve populations where care is harder to access. Also, capping families' co-payments at 7% of the family income. That is a lot of change in a short time that is going to affect all of our childcare centers that take subsidy. These policies weren't banned, however. States may still adopt them based on their own assessment of what works for their communities. So this requirement that we've had since 2024 has now become a choice for each state. And if you're in a state like Indiana, all I can say is, Lord help us, because for whatever reason, we do not like to advocate for children very much right now. Hopefully, we are changing that the more we speak out, and we have seen some progress in that area. So hopefully your state is one of the states that is not ranking 51st for early childhood right now. And yes, I did say 51st. That is because we count different territories in those numbers. So that would be very, very last for those of you in Indiana. So whoever runs your state agency now gets to decide which rules that were rescinded they still want to follow. Again, Lord help us, Indiana and other states like North Carolina who are really going through it right now, Oklahoma. We feel for you guys as well. Let's translate this into dollars because you cannot have a business without having dollars. We need real profit and loss to make our businesses flow, just like any other business out there. However, somehow in early childhood, it seems like money becomes a option rather than a necessity. So let's walk through the 4 stages through a real profit and loss and what you're looking at. Enrollment versus attendance. This one is really going to sting a lot of us, especially those childcare centers that get paid based on tuition weekly versus daily, which honestly is every childcare center that I know of. Nobody seems to really go daily anymore because we need to have real budgets and we need to know how to plan. So, if you're doing enrollment versus attendance, that means if the family has the flu for 1 week, which happens frequently in northern states, or they have a family vacation that they've planned, and you're staffing a full classroom, but you're only getting paid partial because for whatever reason, that family did not attend that week. Ratios do not flex with attendance, and your payroll does not either. So, whether that child attends or not, you still have to have an employee there ready to care for that child. So, enrollment versus attendance doesn't really work for those of us in the early childhood field. In fact, a lot of schools are still saying that even if we get subsidy enrollment versus attendance, our families then become responsible for any days that they miss because our budgets still have to go biweekly tuition. We cannot just, hey, hope you make it today. That doesn't work in early childhood. And it doesn't work in our education systems, K through 12 either. So I don't know why they think that's going to work for early childhood. The second part of this is prospective versus retroactive. This is a working capital question. And retroactive means that you are basically floating the state a loan to care for these children until you get paid for it in hopes that you get paid for it. Now, I know right now in Indiana, we get paid 32 days after a child enrolls on subsidy with us. So we are shelling out funds before we even get a paycheck from the state that covers that child's tuition. That's hard. I know at one of our schools, personally, we had 75% subsidy before the subsidy cuts happened in Indiana. And having that many children on subsidy and getting paid 32 days in the rear can really sting and it's hard to manage. But now that's an option for everybody, not just Indiana. Also, the copay caps. As of March 2026, 31 states, DC, and 5 territories capped copays at 7% of the family's income or less. 7% seems reasonable. If your state lifts it, which now that they've gotten the all clear, many probably will, the increase doesn't land on the state. It lands on your families. And the collection conversation lands on your front desk. Because if families are not capped at any point, then how can they afford what we have to charge to be able to make our budgets? And unfortunately, no one is really looking at the statistics. And we have a lot of people that are trying to make decisions that have never actually worked in early childhood. And last but not least, grants and contracts. These have been used to build things for infants, toddlers, and children's with disabilities. Children with disabilities, sorry. But now they're becoming optional. And so we are probably going to see fewer and fewer grants out there to help us build programs that need to meet the needs for infants, toddlers, and children with disabilities. How sad is that? Like, my mind is blown, honestly, in the things that have happened in early childhood this last year, and that is part of why we started this podcast is because people were not really talking about it. We were going and researching information for ourselves to find out what we needed to do. Licensing was not sending that information to us. The government's not sending that information to us. We had to go out and find it. And we had finally had enough. People need to start having real conversations about what is happening and speaking up because this is honestly just getting ridiculous. It's absolutely insane that states like Indiana can brag about sitting on a surplus while families in need are suffering. That's not a surplus, sir. That means we're not doing our job. We need to help our families because childcare is expensive. And it has to be expensive because of the requirements that we follow, the quality that we provide, the services that we provide. This is like any other business out there right now. And we cannot keep taking away funding to help our families. That's insane to me. Let's talk a little bit more about the state layer because the federal government has put these things in place and they're saying now, hey, it's up to the states, less government. I'm all for less government, to be honest, because y'all are just messing it up left and right now. However, we need to have some guidelines and some regulations. Some states are going to do very well with this, and they're going to decide that quality is important and early childhood is important. However, other states are really not going to go that route. And unfortunately, Indiana has been one of those states. Like I've mentioned a few before, Oklahoma and North Carolina. It's a struggle right now. And you're hoping that your state is going to make the correct decision, just like as we've been going down this deregulation situation that we've been facing this year in early childhood, we're hoping that each individual center will still keep the standards of quality, even if their state doesn't. But how do they do that without support? That is the big question. And that is why more and more of us need to get involved. Indiana currently pays by enrollment for subsidy and On My Way pre-K vouchers, which has happened within this last year, and it has been very difficult. Um, our families still have to pay if they miss a day because we have to know our budget. So it encourages families to come. However, it encourages families to come when their child's sick. So we're just spreading germs. And don't worry, we still do follow our sick policies and all of that. But at what point does a family say, like, my kid has to be there because I can't afford to pay for the extra day that they're not attending? We're putting families more in a hardship than we're helping them by changing the rules this way. Indiana has also cut the CCDF reimbursement rates in October of 2025. Well, it kind of came out in September, but it really got cut in October. And they have announced that they cut infant and toddlers down 10%, preschool down 15%, and school age down 35%. As a multi-center owner in Indiana, I can tell you that that is a lie, and that is what has been announced to the public. My subsidy cuts are 68% at one school. So the 35% that they're coming up with is ridiculous. In fact, when they try to back themselves up and explain how they got these percentages, They stated that that's because these percentages and the cuts that they are telling the public about and what percentage that is at is because of the increase we got during COVID. And so they went back to the prior rate before COVID, which is like 10 years old at this point, and said, well, that's the cut from this rate. However, Indiana was up for a rate increase during COVID time. So we're just not getting that rate increase either. My issue with all of this is the transparency, the dishonesty. If you're going to make cuts, be real about it, be clear about it, and let owners know what you're actually planning instead of rolling out rule change after rule change in a negative direction. They need to be more transparent, and they're lying to our communities about what is happening, and that is not okay. The state had framed those cuts as addressing a $225 million funding gap through 2026. And they blamed that on prior administration and their use of temporary COVID relief funds. So again, we're just going to exclude the rate increase that we were supposed to already get before COVID happened. What? Makes absolutely no sense. And doing all of this and telling us it's because of a funding gap while we are sitting on a surplus. Again, lies, not making sense. Roughly 30,000 children remain on the wait list in Indiana, even through a $200 million boost, which happened in April of 2026 and began moving 14,000 children off of the wait list starting in May. Let's get a little bit more into that for Indiana because we are in a county in Indiana. We were excited to see that the government had acknowledged that the economy would actually lose $4.2 billion if they continued these subsidy cuts. So they decided to put back in $200 million to take some of the kids off the wait list. However, when they did this, they announced weeks later to childcare providers, not to the public again, not being transparent, that some counties would not receive this funding. Well, guess what county we're in? One of the counties that did not get to receive that funding. So you're telling me that you cut our subsidy, to which at one school I had 75% subsidy, and then you gave it to other people in other counties when you decided to give money back? Okay, cool. Thank you. Appreciate the help, and I'm sure other people do too. However, we are not seeing a bunch of children come off this wait list, not at any school in Indiana. We are sitting with half empty classrooms because of the subsidy cuts right now. It is not a lack of childcare providers. It is a lack of funding and support. But don't worry about it. Your state now gets to make that decision individually. Even though nobody sent you a letter about it. Because we are missing transparency. I find it funny that everyone wants early childhood providers to be transparent. However, we don't get the same respect from our leaders and our government. It's really disturbing right now. I don't want to bring you all the negative news today, but we do need to turn up the conversations. We need to be having more conversations. We need to have a plan. We need to start talking about these things so that childcare providers are not caught off guard. We have seen the number keeps changing but over 300 childcares close in Indiana. And I have heard it's all the way up to 460. However, I have not been able to confirm that number quite yet. So I am working on confirming that number, but this is just getting ridiculous. I want to leave you with some things that you can do, kind of your action steps for the next 14 days. Some concrete action steps that you can do to find out what's going on in your state, what the plan is, and so that you're not caught off guard as a business owner. So, the first thing that you can do is call or email your state subsidy lead agency and ask them 4 questions directly. Question 1: are we keeping enrollment based payment? That question is key, y'all. You need to know so you can plan. You can't change their answer, unfortunately, but you can plan. Question 2: how are we being paid? Is it going to be proactive or retroactive? We need to know because we have to plan as business owners so we're not caught off guard. Question 3: are copays for families in your state still going to be capped? Again, how much can families really afford? Question 4: are the grants and contracts going to continue for your state? Are there going to be opportunities to get a grant to help support some of the funding that you're probably going to be losing out on? Action step number 2: pull the last 6 months of subsidy payments from your school and then calculate the gap between enrollment based and attendance based revenue. You need to know your exposure number before it's real. And we're going to give you some resources in the comments that you can download and use as kind of a guide to find out these numbers. Also, some things that you can use as for contacting your state representatives. Action step number 3: the stress test. 60 days of payroll. You need to know how much that's going to cost, just in case you are being paid retroactively. So you need to plan for that. You need to make sure your accounts are up and you have that funding in there to roll over. That has been a challenge, and it is a challenge for many schools, but we need to know the numbers so we know what we're looking at. Action step number 4: draft your parent copay letter now. Do it in the calm and not when the change is happening. That way, you have time to think about it, you have time to process it, and you're not trying to hurry up and get out a letter quickly to families. Action step number 5: get on your state's association's policy list. This is the second time in 12 months that the ground has been shaking beneath us quietly because these steps that are moving in a negative direction for early childhood are not being announced loudly. They're not being talked about loudly unless you are raising awareness. And so it's important to get on your state's association policy list so that you know what's happening. And I know NACCE does a lot of public policy. Get on there and make sure you're informed all the time on what's going on. Like I said, we will be putting some resources and some links in the comments so that you can have some action steps to go with this and some things to download. Um, we have the 4 questions outlined for you and an email that you can just copy and put in your own information. And then we also have some ways to know your number exposure and how to calculate that for you. So we want to make sure that you get those resources. But remember, you are a CEO. You are running a business. You can't control the idiocracy that is happening right now in the federal rulemaking, but you can control whether you find out in July or in November when your deposit is short. You can control planning. You can control being prepared for what is about to happen. Owners who read the rule get to make a plan, and owners who don't read the rule just get to react to what's happening around them. So make sure that you are fully informed and know what is happening in your state, because it is so important as we are facing a time where early childhood is changing drastically everywhere. And shout out to those states who are doing it right, because it takes a lot to do it right now. And the fact that they're listening to early childhood providers and not just making rules when they've never stepped inside a classroom makes a big, big difference. So shout out to you. I know this was a deep, heavy conversation today, but it needs to be raised and awareness needs to happen. And so I thank you for tuning in. My co host, Katie, will be back with us soon. Again, she is off doing some things at our own schools because we are in the lovely state of Indiana, ranking 51st right now out of all of the states and districts for early childhood. So she will be back with us soon, but she has been running around trying to make sure we are all good at our schools, as that takes a top priority for us because we are all about the children first. So thank you for tuning in. Leave some comments on what is happening in your state. We would love to hear more from you guys. Comment, like, share, check out the vault with some resources there as well. Childcareconfidential.com. I'm Jessica Hampton, and we will talk to you all soon. Have a wonderful week. Bye.